My name is Scott David Garson. I'm a former software engineer, and I woke up and decided I want to start creating things. I want to create cool things. And so I've transitioned into gaming and, in particular, narrative design right now.
How did you even get to narrative design? How did you decide that is the first way to go as far as entering this thing?
So, when I was between jobs, I started tinkering around with artificial intelligence and built a platform as a writing assistant. I had an idea for a fantasy novel that I wanted to create. I was dog fooding the platform as it's going. So I would have it generate locations. If I wanted a kingdom, village, city, or a ruin, I would use, I coded it so I could, I'd input certain parameters, give it a flavor of what it's looking for, and bam, it would generate the history, the description of the place, a few names, right, and
Hmm.
options, right? And then I extended that to characters, right? So I would say, hey, I want a dwarf or an elf or a gnome or a
Hmm.
bugbear, and I wanted them to be, give them the profession, give them their gender, give them their age, and it would generate their appearance, their backstory, their disposition. It's really amazing to see what it comes up with. It's almost like I've got some interns, writers that I
Yeah.
can say, hey, give me some ideas, right? And then I'll pick them and figure out, okay, how do I want to integrate them into the plot? How important
Hmm.
are they? What are they going to do, right? What I found was just mind blowing when it's able to put two characters together and give them a topic of conversation, their attitudes towards each other, the context, and say, go. And it's like directing some improv actors. So I felt that if I could get paid to do this, that would be amazing.
Hmm.
I was doing a written ebook, an audio book, and a video book all concurrently, using Blender and DAZ Studio for creating the
Yeah.
characters. I was using, Premiere. I was using, Adobe Audition for putting the music, or sorry, putting the dialogue together. It's a really powerful text to speech engine. And I thought, yeah, that is exactly what I would love to do as a career. So then I started thinking, okay, where could I do that? I don't have any connections in Hollywood, so I can't exactly go and pitch an
Yeah.
idea and step right in as a director, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. So I thought, gaming would be cool. But I had a choice of either going into game development using Unity or game design. And I thought, you know what? I kind of want to take a step back from the development side of things because I
Hmm.
really want to lean on my creative side, which I hadn't exercised a tremendous amount
Hmm.
outside of my stint at an advertising agency. So I moved into game design. We used Unreal Engine, and I picked that up because it just comes naturally. Cross wiring, which good thing or
Yeah.
bad thing, I'll leave that to everyone to decide. I really enjoy telling stories. I'm a dungeon master. I love playing Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of that just you need to come up with those stories very quickly. I've always been good at that. People come give me an idea. They say, "Hey, this is my world. Can you create a story?" Bam, I got a nice idea. Have you thought about
Hmm.
this? And these characters could do this. Here's a whole race of creatures that you can have, and here's their story, and here's how they came to be. Right? I love storytelling, and I figure narrative design is that great blend. Right? I can contribute to the narrative, guide the story. Right?
Hmm.
And then communicate that to others, and then have them be able to exercise their creativity.
Yeah. Talk a little bit because you mentioned being a dungeon master. Explain that because I am not really a Dungeons and Dragons fan. I'm more of a Yu-Gi-Oh fan. So I played
Okay.
Yu-Gi-Oh and was kind of more in that. Got some people who do Pokemon. How did that cultivate the wanting to be a narrative designer or just having to create those stories and stuff? Like, what is that like? Bridging
Yeah.
those two or thinking about them in the same vein.
So actually, it's an interesting, like two sides of gaming, right? So you have your game design side of
Hmm.
things and your mechanics. And
Right.
I think that's where those trading card games come in. It's competitive, you have a
Hmm.
clear objective, and you're designing the mechanics and playability and balance, right? So you're really focusing on how you play.
Hmm.
And then the narrative design, which would be more like Dungeons and Dragons, where your tabletop trading tabletop card games, those are competitive typically, unless you're playing some type of like the 5 points or whatever.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's competitive. Whereas Dungeons and Dragons, my mindset is that it's a cooperative story building exercise. You are creating with the dungeon master and the rest of your party a really cool story, right?
Hmm.
That I know people that are their best memories. Sometimes some people go and say, yeah, I went to the bar, the best football game ever. I won a dart tournament. It was amazing. There are people that call back to the experiences they had in the virtual world in D and
Hmm.
D. Right? You're building that story right? And playing a different character. It's ultimately
Hmm.
about role playing a character, stepping into those shoes. So that's where I see the difference between game design and narrative design, and in tabletop card games and in Dungeons and Dragons, right? You're working together to build a really cool story.
Hmm. That's very interesting. Basically, the competitive versus more of the story
Exactly.
driven element.
There has to be a balance, right? If you had Pokemon, it was just numbers and math. So
Yeah.
great, it might appeal to some people, but you got to have that story. Magic the
Yeah.
Gathering, there's a story. Like, who are the elves? Why are the goblins the way they are?
Hmm.
And they, and who are the planeswalkers, right? So they've built that story so they can have inspiration for a really cool card
Hmm.
back, and then there's a through line for the story that you take through every pack, every booster series, every new
Hmm.
series they have. That's got a story, right? So
Hmm.
the story is very important. Although in some respects, the gameplay absolutely needs to be on point as well. Otherwise, you can have a great story and the mechanics are boring, as opposed to having great mechanics and a really awesome story. You got to have that balance between the two. And so, what I like to do is bring the balance and bring the narrative side.
Explain how you approach your narratives or just sort of the stories you want to create or the ideas. Like, where does all of your, creative inspirations come from? Where do you draw from?
Like the idea of randomizing things a bit. Just brainstorming, stream of thought brainstorming, think of some ideas, what would be cool. I really like playing against type and subverting expectations. So rather than having an orc as a typical brute, I love
Hmm.
the stories where the orc is a poet,
Okay.
right?
Okay, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I loved in Skyrim where there's an orc gourmand,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. That really keeps people on their toes. Once I get a character, I draw from my acting background, where I put together a goat sheet. Goals, obstacles, tactics, and expectations. Right. So I really like to get into that character's head and say, okay, well, okay, fine. There's a guard. Okay, great. What are they doing? Why are they guarding? What's important to them? What would they rather be doing? What's their motivation? Otherwise, they just become mindless robots, right?
Yeah.
So you need to
Right.
have some type of backstory. So for every character, no matter how small, I always have some type of backstory, even if it's a sentence. I like to flesh out their history a bit and to make them more believable.
When you are thinking of these ideas, thinking of whatever it is that you're coming up with, like you mentioned AI and having that quasi writing assistant with you. How has that
Yeah.
changed? Now you can think of things in a more vast mindset. How do you, think of it as you bring AI and all of this into it?
Yeah. I find that AI is an accelerator. It enhances human creativity and almost democratizes things in the sense that I can now step into the role of a senior
Mm,
writer or as a director, as I mentioned, director of improv talent, right? I get to focus on building a person.
okay.
Right, with their
Right.
backstory, I explain they grew up as an orphan in this
Hmm.
town, or they were the son of a wealthy business magnate, right? And now he's a hunter, and he wants to he sees himself as a hunter. He wants to impress people with his trophies. He doesn't care where he gets them
Hmm.
from, right? And so that that type of thing is what I flesh out in their character profile. So I usually have a document that has their name, race, gender. By
Hmm.
race, I'm talking elf, dwarf, their age, a bit of their backstory, and their personality type. I also tend to think about what their level of education is, equivalent to our world.
Hmm.
Right? Do they graduate high school? Do they have a doctorate? Do they leave school early to work on the farm? Therefore, they might have more wisdom in terms of harvesting and animals versus
Hmm.
book knowledge, which has an effect on their level of diction, what their accent is. I sometimes try to mix things up. And then what I will do is I'll write more or less what I want them to say in my words or close enough to what I think their level of dialect would be. And then I just say, write this in their voice.
Hmm.
And what
Interesting.
it comes back with is pretty darn good. I'm very impressed. Of course, I'll take that and I will change it up and make sure that things make sense and it's
Hmm.
congruent. But for the most part, I found it to be fantastic. Again, it's like having writing interns where you can say, "Hey, I need a village. I need 5 NPCs. Can you make them for me?"
Hmm. And how has that changed for you as far as, I guess, first getting started? I'm assuming you really didn't have AI to go off
Mhm.
of when you first was going. Like, how do you like the change or like the accelerant that AI is? Like, it's going to continue to further itself and continue to get smarter. Do you think it's more of a positive, more of a negative? Obviously people think On one hand, it's the greatest thing ever. On the other end, it's gonna destroy mankind. So where do you fit on that spectrum, and how does it fit with what you're doing?
Well, in general, I think it's a positive thing, right? I kind of view AI as a gateway to be able to do more towards the Star Trek future and the
Hmm.
Orville future, right? Where AI can take care of the menial stuff.
Hmm.
Now, I know there's the concept of, hey, I wanted AI to do my dishes and my laundry, right?
Yeah.
Wash my car, right? I didn't want
Yeah.
it to do, so I could do art and write. I didn't want to do my
Hmm.
art and writing so I can have more time to do dishes and
Yeah.
get that because we're not there. I understand the philosophy of it, but the practical side is those other things require robotics, which is
Hmm.
coming, right?
Yeah. For
Um,
sure.
but again, I find that with me, it allows me to jump ahead to being the director level, to have the vision without worrying about the minutia of doing that, right? So I can create a quest line in a day
Yeah.
from start to finish, right? Of course, yeah, I would want to revise that over time
Right. Right.
myself,
Right.
but I don't think it'll replace humans entirely, if that's
Right.
the concern. We still need artists, right?
Yeah.
It's just going to be a different way of working, right? Like similar to how digital spreadsheets became a thing. All the people that had to write in pencil and ledgers on paper, well, I'm out of a job now because you need to learn, right? I can see, particularly now with AI agents, it'll be kind of a partnership and you'll be delegating your team of agents to do some
Hmm.
of the stuff for you, which means not to say, okay, now I no longer need to hire an assistant. There is a little bit of that because, hey, I've got no budget. I wish I could pay people if I could, but obviously I don't have that luxury right now. But it also allows people to really focus on what they got into this business to do rather than paperwork or sending emails or even drafting up 50 different characters. It would take a long time for a human to do. With AI, boom, I got a list of them right now. 50 names for plants, 50 names for animals. It's just another tool in your toolbox that allows you to do your work better and
Yeah.
faster
Yeah.
and get to a medium fidelity prototype a lot faster.
Hmm.
Right. If I'm making a prototype, I have an idea of what I want. I'm not going to spend, a weekend in Blender trying to make all these little items. I'll just describe it to a text to 3D tool. Bam, there it is. Good enough for now. I'm
Hmm.
not going to release with it, right? I pitch the idea, I get some funding. Okay, I'm hiring a real 3D artist to do that,
Hmm.
right? When I'm doing, I use 11 Labs for text to
Okay.
speech, right?
Yeah.
I will put that in for stand-in text, right? With the intention that when I've got budget, I will absolutely hire human voice talent. I would love just on principle because we want people employed, but also they bring that human passion to it. I've got one character for my story. I have an idea in my head what I want her to sound like. Can't quite get that in AI,
Mm-hmm.
11 Labs, but I would love to see a voice actor's take on her,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because they could even come up with something I didn't even have in mind, and I love it. There's that whole dynamic, which is amazing. So
And I
that's
think that's the another thing too with AI is that you just can't quite exactly get what you want. Like, I
mhm,
mean, you can get probably 90 to 95% of what you want, but it's
mhm.
that 5% where that human touch is very much required. So like, I think that's why people are still able to tell whether or not something is AI generated or doesn't have
Yeah,
that human
yeah.
soul.
And that 5% makes all the difference. I've seen a couple, well, YouTube videos in particular. There's tons of those shorts that you can tell
Yeah.
they're completely AI generated.
Right.
Because they're mispronouncing things. The
Mhm.
voices sound good. It just okay, yeah, okay, and they got me fooling for a little bit. Except there's a couple of voices you recognize. Okay, oh, that's the guy that sounds like Tim Russ.
Yeah.
That's that voice. But I think in general, AI is a net positive. We just need to make sure that we hire people when we are able,
Hmm.
right? Real human beings again, because that not only keeps people employed and motivated, but also it gives you the value of that
Yeah.
human experience, right?
Hmm.
And also to make sure that people are compensated correctly,
Hmm.
right? I would love to see a way where voice actors could license their digital clones and their
Mm.
digital
Yeah.
clones draw
Mhm.
a salary
Yeah.
based on their usage. Not as much as a live actor, but I think over time, right, you just kind of spread that. 100 people want to use your voice,
Mhm.
right? Then you get some income every time. That's something the studios need to figure out. And also
Yeah.
ethic based on royalty. I think there's some ethical questions around that. So let's say Betty White, people wanted to use her voice.
Mm.
How would that, I mean, obviously her sitcoms are going to live on, her acting, her movies are going to survive her, right? But theoretically, you could digitize her personality. And then you could say, hey, let's make a brand new movie with Betty White.
pretty
Harrison
much. Yeah.
Ford, or Will Smith, or anyone.
Yeah.
I think actually Futurama is a good barometer for that. They had an
Mm.
episode where basically Fry did the same thing.
Oh yeah, I
Perfect.
remember that.
So there are some ethical things. Maybe an actor, when they're gone, they don't want to be around forever.
Hmm.
It could be weird if their family saw a brand new movie with
Yeah, and
someone,
that coming
right?
out, they've been dead
Yeah.
for 30 years, and yeah,
Exactly.
that.
It could be a bit strange. Anyhow, we need to wrestle with those ethics, right? To respect people's wishes and to make sure people are fairly compensated for what they do, but also make sure it's affordable because otherwise my $0 budget won't allow me to hire Brad Pitt or a
Yeah.
voice clone.
You mentioned being a part of the advertising world. Have you thought about or used any of those advertising skills within sort of the narrative design, the gaming side of things? Like, I'm assuming that's in demand. I mean, advertising is always in demand,
Mhm.
but as far as like the knowledge you have you been able to use any of those skills within gaming, or have been sort of fewer further between?
Yeah. More, I would say more the soft skills, collaboration.
Yeah.
When I was working in advertising, I was working in the capacity of a developer. I did work with games. I made quite a few games for the Lucky Charms site back in the day. I'm probably dating
Hmm.
myself. But yeah, they had a game that or a site that had a whole bunch of Flash games. Come up with a new serial, and then we would put together a game for it. So rapid prototyping is one thing that I learned how to put together, just get the idea out there, get it testable, playable. And we can always add more color to it later. Collaboration with creatives. Again, with my left and right brain, I'm kind of, I naturally, have that mix.
Hmm.
I know enough at least to be dangerous. So actually, one of my best experiences at the advertising agency was we were pitching an idea for a stuffed pizza company. I came up with the idea of this whole narrative around this thing, and they went for it. It's a brainstorming session, and all the dots went on mine. I feel
Yeah.
vindicated, right? That collaborative nature is good, but I also learned that it's good to know enough about everything to be dangerous. Right?
And so, as you progress with what you're learning and all of the different things you're doing, you mentioned AI assisting you in being able to do things quicker and things like that. But
Mhm.
also, more importantly, that you're able to put your ideas out there. You're fostering this idea that you already have. What do you think? Do you think that is more of the path for you, like more of the, let's say, independent, that sort of route? Or would you like to be with one of these big companies and start designing for a really famous character? Where do you sort of see, yourself going? Like, say that opportunity arises and you can say, hey, I can take this big opportunity in this big company and I might not have as much say so. I might not be able to do exactly what I want to do when I want to do it. And I might have a
Hmm.
certain vision and somebody else might take that vision and,
Interesting.
do it a different
Yeah.
way. It's just a lot of ways to think about it. Do you think you would enjoy the role you're in now, just being able to do it at a faster, higher quality clip? Or do you think that, hey, if a opportunity comes with a big company and they say, we would love for you to design this or help us work on this, or, we're going to give you a contract for
Mhm.
this and, we want you to do all of that. Like, where do you see yourself going with that?
Yeah, well, I think it would depend on the property and how passionate I am about that particular genre, right? For example, I would love to work, like Baldur's Gate 3, I would have loved to
Hmm.
work on that, right?
Yeah.
I love what they did. I love how they're subverting expectations all the time, right? I think there's another company that built Demio. They're apparently working on a VR, D&D world. Dungeons and
Mm.
Dragons world, right? Which I mean, I would love to be part of that world, right?
Yeah.
I've been trying to get into Wizards of the Coast in some capacity because
Yeah.
I love that feel, right? It all depends on the property, right? I was referred to a company that did a lot of games that were alluding to marijuana, right, and cannabis,
Mm.
right? I mean, no judgments, do what you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. But for me, I'm just ethically not comfortable with that, even though it's legal in Canada. It's just not my choice. That's not my lifestyle. So I don't participate. So I don't think I'd be a very good choice for writing stories along that line. It really all depends, but I think that could be a lot of fun, even like a Star Trek world. Okay, I'm showing my geek here, right? But working on a Star Trek
It's the
franchise,
Geek Channel.
Exactly. I feel, yeah, you're my people. You're my tribe. If they ever brought Firefly back in a game or something like that, oh, man, I would love that. I just love that
Hmm.
world. Fantasy, science fiction, that I absolutely love. So I would be very interested in joining a studio in that capacity, particularly if they'd be interested to listen to my story, my saga that I've got. I think I've got some good IP that could do well and, some compelling storylines, but I just can't build it myself right now, other,
Yeah.
the few hours I have available to me. But yeah, I mean, that's the opportunity to be able to get in there, learn to collaborate with other people. For me, I'm self-taught in almost everything,
Hmm.
right? And I've kind of done that out of necessity because I used to be a pretty strong introvert. I'd rather just hey, I need a database set up. Okay, fine. How do you set up a database? And I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hire someone or ask a favor. I can learn that, and boom, there we go.
Mhm.
So that collaborative space of being able to brainstorm ideas and improv techniques, I think would be a lot of fun to get involved with the larger studio. Of course, not saying with the Forge Hammer, where I'm working with now, it's not like we're not doing that. We have these jam sessions and we'll throw our thoughts out into the chat. It's a very collaborative effort. I just think it'd be on a much larger scale, at a larger studio. You'd be able to work with a lot more people. The challenge, though, is that because I'm a generalist, it's hard. Generalist would be something like a creative director. I'm coming in from zero, trying to get into a creative director role. Probably not going to happen. You got to put 10, 15, 20 years of dues in before you can get to that, apparently, right? So,
Mhm.
which I don't think I've got that many left.
Talk about what you're working on now as far as design or things coming up that you can talk about, what you got working on right now.
Yeah. So we're working towards a Kickstarter for it's a open world MMO game. It's a server-based MMO
Hmm.
called Seekers of the Ancient. I was introduced to them by one of my former colleagues. I ran a D&D campaign while we were on the road, and he's like,
Mm.
"Wow, that was amazing, cool. So Scott might be good for this, right?" So yeah, so I am helping to build out the lore. The game looks beautiful, right? It's got stylized 3D assets that are on par with the big MMOs. All the mechanics are in place. Loot pinatas type of thing.
Hmm.
But what they needed was someone to come in and help build the stories around that, right? So that's where I came in. I came in at the high level trying to figure out what is this world, right? How is it created? How does this fit in with the concept that was already established?
Right.
Right. But then how do we make that make sense? Right. Because I want everything to be congruent, right, and logical within this world, right? So if you're living in a fantasy world where the butcher across the street got killed by something and then the next day, boom, they're back. Okay, how would you react?
Right.
Right? It's kind of a slight nod to Dirt League.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I love their thing. I forget the actual name, but Epic NBC Man. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I want to do a slight nod to that type of almost self-awareness, right?
Hmm.
Almost realize what's going on, but it's just, or they're puzzled like this world doesn't make sense, right?
Hmm.
Okay, you sold me an eggshell and you want 10
Yeah.
gold for. So back to what I'm doing is, yes, I'm building that. I'm building out the characters like the NPCs, their backstories, their relationships towards each other, right? So you say, hey, go and talk to this NPC. Well, why? Why would you want me to go over there rather than
Hmm.
just hold up a sign and say point them over there, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then the quest dialogues. The challenge that I'm finding is balancing it back to the gameplay and the game mechanics of people who play the game and all they look at is just the quest objectives, right? Skip dialogue, skip dialogue, accept, boom, right? So we need to make it fun for those people, right? So you've got those
Hmm.
clear objectives and a variety of tasks, right?
Hmm.
That's what I'm working on right now. We need to mix up the tasks to make things more engaging and more fun.
Right. And is there any sort of timeline as far as when to expect that?
We do have some early access on Steam. We're getting to the point where we don't want playtesters to take a look at it. We'd like to build up a community of people, particularly people in gaming, for two reasons. One, we'd like to get a gamer's perspective, right? People who enjoy playing the games, but also I'd love to get some feedback from quest designers, level designers, and musicians when we get a track in there, and sound designers to say, hey, what do you think, right?
Hmm.
Who knows? At some point, we'd love to get people invested in the game,
Right.
interested. So maybe when we have the ability to, we can bring on some of the people that were in our community giving us that great feedback. You mentioned the music here is really not congruent with the zone. I would like to come on board and fix that.
No doubt. That's pretty cool. And so that was kind of going to be my last question. Give us some information as far as how we can find you, find your games, find the stuff that you working on. Like what is like the future hold for you as far as, narrative design, gaming, just kind of
Hmm.
give me a general closeout and plug what you got going on as much as
Sure.
possible.
So online, I go by Tekkromancer,
Mm,
Tekkromancer.
okay.
And it's kind of a nod to technology and my dark aesthetic of necromancy. So that's where I go by. Portfolio.tekkromancer.com is where you can see some of my work. I do have more targeted portfolios. Again, as a generalist, I find it difficult to specialize and say, this is all
Yeah.
I do, because that's not the way my brain works. If I stop learning, I'll drown. The game is Seekers of the Ancient. You can search that up on Steam and wishlist it. And then the studio is forge-hammer.com.
You got anything else that you want to touch on that I haven't?
I mean, generally, I know things are really tough in the industry, like across all industries. Tech just got decimated. Gaming is, yeah, there's a lot of people out there. I'm very fortunate to have been brought into this team, which is good, but just hang in and keep your skills up and learn something new. Maybe it might not work for everybody, but I am continuously learning new things. Network.
There you go.